Hi everyone, here is my final research proposal. For my research, I was looking into cross-curricular advice in the classroom. So as an introduction, when I started out my journey of education in my undergrad, I really believed that being a master in my content area would make my students fall in love with my subject more. So my content I decided to major in was English, and I was certain that if I knew everything I could possibly know about English, then my students would love English as much as I did. So I really focused on only English classes and how I could get the English curriculum across to each of my students. When I took one of my first classes in my STEP program here at USU, I was introduced to the idea of cross-curricular instruction. The first time I heard about it and I had to do a project in that class, I was immediately intrigued by this idea of cross-curricular instruction. This class was my first encounter with it, and my mindset went from believing that being a master in my subject, being the best for my students, that understanding how to bring cross-curricular instruction into methods into my classroom would actually benefit my students more. They would be able to bridge gaps between the different contents. They wouldn't have to compartmentalize each different subject as they left my class and went into their math class, or left their science class and came into my class. They wouldn't have to shut off parts of their brain and try to just solely focus on English. I could bring aspects of science, aspects of math, and aspects of history into my English classroom so that my students were getting an overall education as they came through my classroom. And this was the spark for my love of cross-curricular instruction and how I could implement this into my classroom. In my literature reviews, I used the funnel method to narrow it down into my need for advice across the curriculum, but I started with communication across the curriculum. Those of you who are in the classroom now and teaching, I'm sure you have PLC groups that you work with, or as you go into your teacher lounge, or as you see your fellow colleagues around, you talk to them. You talk to them about your students. You talk to them about how your lessons are going or how their lessons are going. In a quote that I found in one of my articles, it says, in the early years of innovative cross-curricular instruction, that's the CXC, was an umbrella term for a variety of different activities, incorporating communication skills into particular courses, creating a speaking lab, facilitating faculty development activities for incorporating communication into the course, and implementing an established program focused on taking communication skills across the entire curriculum. So basically, it was a class on how to communicate. So how the students could communicate with the teachers, how the teachers communicate with the students, and even how teachers communicated with fellow teachers. And this communication across the curriculum just brought out that teachers from different content areas were communicating with each other about their students. Then you narrow this down into cross-curricular instruction method, where it was no longer just the communication between the teachers, but the teachers spilling their contents or their subjects into the walls of another classroom. In another one of my articles by Aslan, the call for cross-curricular teaching was not a hit towards those single subject teachers. I really felt like I needed to add this article into my literature review to point out the fact that when we're talking about cross-curricular instruction and how to bring that into our classroom, we're not saying that teachers who only teach math or only teach English are less than those who can bring in cross-curricular instruction methods, but that they can work together. So those teachers who are experts in math or experts in English can help the science teacher or vice versa in bridging those gaps between the contents in order to build with each other and make a better curriculum for their students. This again funnels down even more into the need for advice across the curriculum. Secondary schools have resisted the call for interdisciplinary presentations of subject matter. We are all familiar with these reasons. That does not negate the importance of being able to show secondary students the connections between disciplines, both as a learning tool and a motivational strategy. This is another quote that I found from a teacher who did a study of advice across the curriculum with pre-service teachers. She took these pre-service teachers and she gave them a subject of the day. And she assigned a certain subject for each day. So if it was science, then those pre-service teachers who were majoring in science would receive advice from the English majors and the math majors for how they could implement either English or math or CTE, business, these different contents into their science classroom. So, for example, English teachers giving advice on writing strategies for the science teacher or the math teachers. And I really loved this study on how it talked about not just the learning tool, but this motivational strategy. Those in the secondary classroom are working with teenagers who feel like they have a lot going on in their lives. And if they are saying, if they have a school mind and a home mind and a sport mind, maybe they're playing basketball or football, or they're on the drill team, or they're in the theater. And if they have to turn off these different parts of their brain as they go into these different aspects of their life, they're not going to be as motivated in our different subjects. Where if we can bring their love of theater into our science classroom or into our English classroom to show that those methods can work together, that's going to motivate our students to work harder in our classes. And we need that advice of those teachers who are masters in their content area in order to bring those in. So this narrows it down to my question of what influence does cross-curricular advice have on teachers, specifically in the secondary classroom? My methodology for this is the participants that I would be using would be done in 7th grade classrooms of 6 different teachers at the Terra Academy, which is a charter school here in Vernal, Utah. So with their permission, I would follow their journey as they worked with one another to integrate cross-curricular instruction into their classroom, specifically taking advice from another teacher. I would start with these 6 teachers, and I would break them into 2 different groups. So I'd have 2 groups of 3, and in each of these groups there would be an English content major teacher, a science teacher, and then a teacher from the CTE. Excuse me. Whether that be business or the home economics or one of those CTE classes that they would be working together in these groups of 3. Each of these teachers I would have a pre and post interview with. So I would ask the teachers 3 different questions at the beginning and end of the study. So I would start with some questions at the beginning of the study to really try to get to know the teachers better and their teaching methods. So the first question, excuse me, sorry. The first questions that I would ask are what is their understanding of cross-curricular advice? So I could get a base of how they felt about cross-curricular advice, what they already knew, maybe what they didn't know about it, how they think they could benefit from this cross-curricular advice, and then how they believe their students would react to cross-curricular instruction. At the end of the study, I would then ask these questions again, but tweak them a little bit to what is their new understanding of this advice, what was the biggest benefit that they saw, and how did their students react to this cross-curricular instruction. So that would be my pre and post interview with these teachers. I would also be observing these teachers. So each week, the teachers would meet together over the 6-week unit, and on each of those days that they had a meeting together, I would participate in those meetings as well as choosing one classroom to be in over that 6 weeks, so that I would be in each teacher's classroom at least once and observe the teacher during their lesson. I would watch how they integrate this cross-curricular advice given to them from another teacher to try to balance out what advice was being used, what advice wasn't being used, and how each teacher was being able to work together. Then I would have the teachers come together and do an autoethnography, where each group, so I would end up with 2 autoethnographies, one from each group. The teachers, I would ask them to keep a journal as they went through this 6-week unit, and then they would meet together in their groups of 3 and compare those journals and write about their experience on giving the advice, receiving the advice, and then implementing that advice into their classroom. After I had all those, at the very end, I would gather those autoethnographies of the teachers and ask for a few of their journals, and then keep the notes that I had taken from the observations and the interviews, and I would write my own autoethnography of my journey watching these teachers implement this cross-curricular advice into their classrooms and their struggles, their successes, and how the students really reacted, so that I could get an idea of the benefit that the students were receiving, or maybe see which subjects didn't fit together very well. Because the main point of this is to benefit the students, benefit these schools, so that they're getting a broader education for the students. So the students are feeling this cohesiveness between the curriculum. And if it's not helping the students, then we wouldn't continue this research, and we'd have to find a different method. These limitations in this study, for me, what I felt like would be the biggest thing is that there's been very little research already done on the effects of cross-curricular advice. Because of the difficulties that can arise in this, teachers have different pedagogies, they have different willingnesses to collaborate. This can prove to be difficult when trying to retrieve the data for this study. At the TEAL Academy specifically, there is a range of teachers, from teachers who have taught 30 plus years at the school district and retired, and then decided they wanted to come back and they're teaching in this charter school, to teachers who have only taught for 2 years or 1 year. So if in these groups we have a teacher who has taught for 30 plus years and a teacher who's only taught for 2 years, they might not be able to be willing to receive the advice from someone else. Finally, my conclusion, these findings in these studies could be a starting block for school districts to create better opportunities for PLC groups to work with one another and teacher leadership. If teachers are able to use this cross-curricular advice, they can help students bridge that gap between the contents, so that they're not having to have an English brain, a science brain, a math brain, a basketball brain, a theater brain. They can bring these all together to see these connections between the contents. And sharing the research with others, for teachers specifically, sharing this research that could give them a starting point. They could see what other teachers before them have done, to give them, a leg to stand on, to see which advice they could give, how to implement advice that they're receiving. And then also to administrators and school districts, getting this out to administrators or school districts can bridge this into the classroom. If administrators are seeing this and seeing the success that it had, then they're going to want to implement that more into their classrooms if they can see success stories, rather than just trying to give it to them without this research being done. So that's my research proposal. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening.